Hello and welcome to Season 5 of the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. For the past few years, we've been digging deep into the history of hi-fi, as well as how geopolitics and socioeconomic forces are shaping its present realities. This season, we'll also start to look at hi-fi and audiophilia with an eye toward the future. What's this hobby going to look like as demographics shift? What can we do to bring in new enthusiasts? How will the gear and the hobby itself evolve in the coming decades? To discuss the possibilities, here's host Jorden Guth and this week's guest.
Hello and welcome to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. Today we are kicking off Season 5 with a guest that we have had the pleasure of talking to a couple times before. So let me reintroduce you to Conradin Amft, this time CEO of T+A Elektroakustik. Welcome back.
It's good to be back, Jorden.
Yeah, so the theme for Season 5 is all about kind of what the future of hi-fi holds. And part of the reason that I think you are such a great guest to kick this off, we've had a couple episodes before. So for people that want your kind of origin story and more details, they're going to be linked in the show notes. But what I found fascinating talking to you over the years is you are the younger generation. You're the younger blood in an industry that is typically kind of seen as the baby boomer age. Your father is still involved in the company and the technology and all of that. You still kind of bring some of that new blood and new ideas to T+A and the industry. So I just am so excited to talk to you about all of that.
Yeah, it's always good to have the conversation with you. I'm learning a lot, and it's great to shape those ideas that we can use to kind of push forward new things for the industry and for T+A in particular.
So just kind of walk back, because T+A has a really interesting history in terms of developing speakers and electronics. And then you made a bet on headphones, and you had to convince your father, then CEO, to go not maybe all in on headphones, but to take a pretty big leap into headphones, which you saw as an emerging segment.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that. Like when you were making that decision, when you were thinking about that, you always said like there was no failing. Like if you failed on the first shot, you were done.
Yeah.
Why was that a safe bet in your mind?
Because I had seen user trends to a certain degree that kind of my friends, people at uni, colleagues, when I worked in other industries, always graded up their audio experience by buying headphones rather than speakers. And when you see something like that once, it could be a coincidence, maybe twice still. But if you start to notice a pattern, that is where you can make a bet, and it's still, it might be risky, but it's safer because you have the probability of you not just following a gut feeling, but rather actually seeing a trend. And that is what we've, for the past years, always tried to do, to kind of catch the underlying trends that might go on under the surface in terms of usage patterns. What do people actually care about when they buy hi-fi? Like, how does their definition of hi-fi shift? And coming back to the headphones, that is what we saw, that the definition of hi-fi for a certain younger demographic was very much focused on headphones, that it wasn't a speaker system, but it was actually a headphone, and better still, a headphone that you could use at home and wherever you are. And that is how those ideas came about, and how I thought it was still a risk. Mostly failing would have been bad for me, because if you push kind of the new thing and it just goes up in flames, everybody will doubt that the next idea will be good, because it might equally go up in flames.
Yeah.
And so that was more on the personal side. On the purely business side, all of us felt that there was a sufficient degree of people using headphones that you could move into that space.
Was there this idea that people getting into hi-fi for the first time and headphones being their gateway could or would potentially graduate into like an actual more traditional system after the fact?
Funnily enough, it wasn't on my mind, but it was on everybody else's. And I think that might have been, and you got to talk to the other guys and gals who were involved. That might have made it easier for them to follow the headphone idea, because naturally, if you introduce someone to a brand, they might start looking around and they might see that they currently have a headphone, but they could need a headphone amplifier. That was actually the reason why we've made the headphone amplifier alongside with our first headphones. And so certainly it wasn't necessarily on my mind. Also tells you something about how everybody approaches a problem through their
their lens,
exactly, through their lens. And that is how it came together, that our team saw the possibility, and I think that reduced the risk for them, whereas for me the risk was reduced by seeing the usage pattern. And now both came together, which is just very good for all of us.
Yeah, exactly. And I find that fascinating, that this idea of like gateways into hi-fi or high quality audio. And I remember talking to your father, and it kind of like his origin story, how he got into hi-fi and all that. And that is very traditional for that generation, where they love records, or they love a musician, or they hear something on the radio, and kind of they tinker and they build at their home and all this and all that. When I'm thinking about this new generation of hi-fi enthusiasts, or when you're thinking about it rather, are headphones the only way that you see them getting into hi-fi? Like, do you see a younger crowd like starting by buying a system, for instance, like a fully separate system?
That's a super interesting question. I don't think they necessarily start by buying a system, although some surely will. I don't think all of them buy headphones. I think a large group will actually be drawn in by expressing themselves. So the whole idea of design speakers, which would have been seen as kind of a backhanded compliment maybe a couple of years ago, is actually something that is super interesting, because I think that could be a gateway as well, where a certain demographic is attracted to a product because it looks stunning, and they buy it, and then they discover the sound quality and what it can actually do for them. I'm not sure that people who haven't heard of hi-fi before would immediately jump to a fully separate system, as in defined speakers, amp, dedicated source. But I definitely see design speakers that is all-in-one units that can basically do everything from streaming to actually playing the music out loud through speakers. I already see people coming in through that as well, on an equal trajectory as headphones, because we see that self-expression is a trend in the younger demographic, that they actually want to buy something that expresses part of their personality. And if, for example, a beautifully designed object that plays music does that, that could be their way into the industry, or maybe they stick with it and just keep kind of recycling in that category and keep buying in that category.
Interesting. Yeah, one of the things that I kind of think about in my own kind of experience with hi-fi is so back in the day, I would play stuff out of a set of speakers and I'd be like, this is like whatever. Like I wouldn't really think about it that much. And being around so many different folks and being in a fortunate position to hear a lot of this stuff, I started being like, it really changes you once you start listening to a good set of speakers and you put on a song and you get that emotion, you have that feeling, and kind of you get transported by the audio in a way that like a laptop system really can't do. The phone speakers really can't do. And I think about that. And then I also think about the idea like 10 years ago, actually maybe a little bit more than 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I was in an apartment and I don't really think a full system would have fit in the apartment, nor would my neighbors or anything been appreciative. So I see the kind of appeal for headphones, but I also don't see, or I don't know if that would have actually got me right into like the actual full system. So I'm kind of getting to this thought where it's like, is there kind of less hope for those full systems to be sold as people are maybe going into smaller houses? They're not necessarily able to buy, or smaller apartments rather, they're not really able to have like a larger living space, so they don't have that ability to have a full system actually like set up. Like, do you find that this kind of coming generation has less physical space for which to actually appreciate full hi-fi systems? Is that another reason that headphones and these fully all-in-one systems are becoming more popular?
I think for some of them, although I'm not sure about the living space actually being the reason. And that's a super fascinating train of thought, because I just kept thinking to some of the comparatively small apartments, given the speaker size, that I've seen throughout the years, where I thought this is very interesting that the apartment itself feels rather small and the speakers feel fairly big in comparison. And so I'm not sure that the apartment size itself or the living situation is in fact the real reason or a rationale for not doing it. What I think could be a case is that you can attract people by giving them what they want in their systems. So, for example, easy connectivity to their smartphones, making it easy for them to play back the sources they actually want to listen to. And then it kind of switches that they say, I may not have a lot of space, but it's sufficient to put in those speakers. Whereas maybe before, when they don't see a system that can do everything they want, they would say, oh, I don't have the space. And so
Interesting.
It's fascinating, because it goes into this whole idea of post hoc rationalization, where the question is, what actually is the reason? And what do you make up as the reason for doing or not doing something?
100%. Yeah. And maybe along those lines, it's so T+A, and you guys still sell a lot of separates, but there is kind of you've had more product lines that are getting more integrated in what they offer. So you're including more components into a single device. Do you see that as kind of, and you kind of already talked about it a little bit, this idea that you give people an easy way to do it? So maybe instead of having to educate people on why you need a preamp, an amp, a source, and all this other stuff, if you put all of that into a single device, is that some of the rationale for these more integrated systems?
To a certain extent, yes. Definitely. You have the enthusiasts who, interestingly enough, now, according to what we see, seem to migrate a bit more towards all-in-one systems as well. We call it internally, because we're German and we like our automotive industry very much, but we call it the kind of SUV effect, where you see that you have a trend away from highly specialized components towards more integration. I think it's down to the quality of the components nowadays, that you can get an all-in-one system to sound really good, and maybe as good as separate components sounded some time ago. And so I think there is this trend that you got innovation in terms of the technology, and that leads to just a shrinking floor space, so to speak, of the hi-fi unit itself.
Interesting. So I never actually considered the idea that, and it obviously makes sense. It's kind of an aha moment where as the technology improves, as the measurements improves, and your ability to kind of understand all the pieces that go into something and how they interact, that integrating components together can still allow you to achieve a quality that is high-end, hi-fi, let's say.
Yeah.
Whereas previously it required individual components to isolate themselves, to kind of play within the restrictions of the technology from the time.
Certainly. And applying that to separates, you will now get better sound from separates as well. But I think there are certain cutoff points, so to speak, where people say, at a certain point, I want to have a certain baseline sound quality that has to be very high. But once that is achieved, other factors come into play. And then we're talking about source versatility. How big is a system? How does it look? Which I think is going to be very important. Can I customize it to my liking to a certain extent? Which I also think is a trend that's picking up steam.
Yeah.
And I think that all of those factors then start coming into play when technology allows you to reach that threshold.
Now, you mentioned the SUV effect, and I love this idea, because my understanding of it, and correct me here, but less specialized stuff. So less, let's say, trucks in North America, like the F-150, the standard pickup truck is like the most popular selling vehicle, and less of these small cars, and kind of gravitating towards the middle. That's my understanding of the SUV effect. I'm guessing that's kind of what you're getting at.
Uh, yeah, to a certain extent. What we mean by that, it's super practical, but in the past, like 30 years ago, I was told, I mean, I'm not that old, but I was told that they were usually horrible to drive unless you were like driving in the forest. And now technology has improved in such a way that they are great to drive, but also super practical. And that is where I would stretch the analogy a bit, but argue that technology in terms of hi-fi allows us to get better sound out of more practical, quote unquote, that is maybe smaller, more integrated units.
Interesting. I love that. Now, another thing that we talked about before, and you just kind of reminded me of this a little bit. We were talking about another industry. We're talking about the car industry. Previously, me and you discussed this idea of the watch industry and all the different elements that you saw in the watch industry that kind of had you when you were developing. And I don't know if this was the Solitaire P or the Solitaire T specifically, or probably both, but the idea that you were looking at the watch industry and you were looking how not only did they package, but they marketed and they presented products, and you took some of those ideas and integrated those into headphones. So is the watch industry still one to look at? Is there other industries that you look at and you say, these guys are on the right path forward for this aspect of the future, that you can kind of take those ideas and integrate them into your products?
Yeah, there are many industries, and I think it's always good to keep an eye out for inspiration from other industries. I think the watch industry gets it spectacularly right when it comes to how to present a product, how to imbue it with a certain subjective value, where you allow the person to attribute the value to the product. Also, the car industry that we've touched on before is a very interesting case study when you see how the USP of the product shifts and how you need to adapt to that shift of the USP of the product.
Yeah.
Maybe if you don't mind, I'll just quickly go down that road.
And hit me. I love this.
Good. In the past, it was all about, with cars, it was about driving. And we have this theory that the core function of the product was driving. And if you had a sporty car, you were completely fine with it not being comfortable. Nowadays, people expect products to be much better all around. So it has to be fun to drive. The sat-nav has to be good, but it also has to be comfortable. And I think that is an underlying trend that we should keep an eye on as the audio industry as well. So for us, in terms of audio industry, great sound is still the number one thing that we need to aspire to, but we have to be easy to use. There has to be a certain degree of customizability to it. And we, I think, need to focus on different aspects of the user experience more and more now, rather than focusing on one, trying to nail 100 or 99.5% of that one thing and disregarding the rest, because I think that is a major difference between the younger generation and the maybe baby boomer generation, who are used to products having a narrower focus than they do today, and thereby accepting that a product can be spectacularly good at one thing and spectacularly bad at everything else, or at other things. And now I think for us, it's really about maximizing the whole experience, from streaming, amplification, that is sound quality, but also usability, app integration.
So, and I love this idea, because one of the biggest things that when I consider hi-fi, like when I think back and I think about like my perception of hi-fi and a lot of the components and all of that, was this idea that it's hard to set up the user interface. If there was even a digital user interface on a lot of the technologies, they were not good. It was almost painful to try and adjust settings and stuff like that. And I have this thing, and anyone that's met Doug Schneider, SoundStage founder, kind of knows this. He really does not like Apple products. and I really enjoy them. And I think one of the biggest things for me is that, yes, they are not necessarily the best at any one particular thing, but they bring up that elevation. That user experience is something that they focus on to make it easy for people.
Yeah.
So even me, I have sets of Apple headphones, and I'm willing to accept less audio, less
Exactly.
audio quality, let's say,
Yeah.
at the benefit of having my headphones automatically switch devices without me thinking about it. It just kind of knows what I was doing when I picked up my iPad to continue a video that was on the television or something. So I think that's fascinating. It's this idea that in order for the hi-fi industry to evolve, things need to improve in a way that allows a younger generation to get the things that they might already be getting elsewhere. Like,
Exactly.
if you're having a terrible experience on your amplifier, you're not going to want to go back and interact with that amplifier. But if that experience on the amplifier is similar to the experience you get on your phone or on your computer, your tablet, your car even,
Yeah.
then that connection between you and the product is going to be stronger.
I agree 100%. And I really think it boils down to the willingness to accept trade-offs, which I think, I mean, we are fairly close in age, I think.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
closer to one another than to, for example, Doug or my father.
100%. Yeah.
And so I think neither of us would accept trade-offs to a degree that either Doug or maybe my father would.
Yeah.
And so it's really about being better at the whole experience and then excelling at several key factors. Whereas I think the older generation would be completely fine with a product being very good at one thing and then subpar in others.
Yeah, they'll deal with the hassle of setting something up or trying to change an input or whatever it may be. They'll get mad and throw a controller at the wall, but they'll deal with that because they know that the final output is enough to kind of make up for it.
Yeah.
So this is actually kind of a neat segue because the last time we visited T+A, there was an entire video series that was filmed around the user interface and the amount of time and attention that you put on user interface. Yeah. And I remember talking to you about the kind of idea of what should be buttons, what should be touchscreen, what goes in a menu, all of that. So is this kind of a trend? Because there are still like physical buttons on a lot of your products. Yeah. There seems to almost be in the industry kind of people are going back to more buttons previous to the full touchscreen interface. So talk to me a little bit about that. Is that what you're kind of talking about in terms of compromise and in terms of the usability in that experience?
Yeah, among other things. So what I would say is the usability, I think, doesn't need to be a specific technology. So you don't need a touch screen if it doesn't make sense. But what it has to do is it has to be, as you said before with Apple, it has to be easy. It has to be seamless to a certain degree. There is a trend that people don't like to read the manual anymore, if they ever did.
That's me.
Same here. So I think the search cost, so to speak, needs to be very low in terms of how long does it take you to get the product to play? How long does it take you to change settings or something? And that is one of the things we looked at when we decided how to create our interfaces, because we've had our history with purely touch interfaces as well. Yeah. And like most industries that went in that direction, we also came back because we just saw that touch screens are great at some things, but physical buttons, rotary wheels are sometimes much easier to use and much more fun to use.
The fun to use is a good point, because I remember spinning the gain dial on some of the T+A stuff, and it's fantastic.
A lot of work went into that, into how to make it feel like have a certain feel to it, because that's the way you interact with it. And if you enjoy doing it, there is the connection to the product that keeps you coming back to a certain laptop that you just like, or to a certain smartphone.
And I think the other thing that you touched on, and I see it in the T+A products, is there's a lot of care and attention devoted to the industrial design. And you were kind of mentioning the idea that there is kind of this expectation in And I guess there was to a degree in older generations, but even more so now, there's this expectation that something that is going to be living in your home has to look a certain way, has to look halfway decent and good.
Yeah.
Um, do you see that as a differentiator compared to some of the other companies that might not put their time and care into the, like, if a company is going right after the quality of audio, but their industrial design isn't really there, is that kind of a misstep?
I think it really depends on what you want to achieve as a company. So if your goal is, we want to focus on sound and on nothing else, I think you've got a great offering because that will attract people. But as soon as you say, we want to attract a certain group of people who care about the industrial design, who want to have the product proudly displayed in their living space, then it really is necessary, I would say, to make the product to give it a unique soul, so to speak, to make it a unique ambassador of the brand rather than ripping something off that you kind of paint in a different color, but pretend it's yours. So I think it really depends on what you want to achieve. But if your goal is to reach people who want to display the product in the living space, then I think it really is necessary to spend hours talking about chamfers. And I'm just looking at the top of my screen sits a Symphonia, and I'm just looking at it, and it really comes down to getting those chamfers right, to getting the LEDs for the VU meters right. And we've spent, I would say, hours discussing stuff like that.
And I love it. And I think for me personally, like I'm a huge fan of industrial design in everything. And there's not a lot of products that make it into my house that don't have some element of industrial design that I resonate with.
Yeah.
And I think like even just looking around me here, like when something is made with purpose and made with like love and energy, and you can tell like they thought about these certain things,
Yeah.
you have that feeling even if you can't express it. Like you fall in love with, like for me, I fall in love with these water bottles, these Yeti water bottles, because they have like a design and a purpose that are so intertwined, and you can tell that somebody spent a lot of time figuring out how to make them the certain way and the reason why the handles arch back and all this stuff. So I think the audio goes, or the hi-fi equipment goes into that as well, where you can tell the products that people spend time and care and attention to in all details, not only just the highest quality audio, but then also into how it looks and how it interacts.
Totally.
One question, and you were kind of talking about this, making the products more personalized.
Yeah.
What does that necessarily mean? Like, what does that look like? Obviously, color is one aspect of that in materials, but is there more to that? Is there other ways that you think about personalizing a product or giving people that connection to their products?
I think one aspect of it is definitely colors. So you can fine tune, for example, plugging the product here, but you can fine tune the colors of the VU meters on the Symphonia to your liking. That's one thing where you can play around with it, where you can make changes, where you can have it be one color one day and a different color the next day. Deep down and long term, I think it's more about collaboration. That's why we've now launched it's not officially launched, but we're doing it. We're calling it Atelier, where if a customer comes in and says, I like the product, I don't like the color, then on certain products, we allow them to work with our specialists. And then it's a collaborative process where we fine tune the color. We can even go in the direction of maybe working on materials. And it's less about getting that exact color and more about, we feel, or what we've experienced working with our customers who came in and did that, about them being able to actually work on the product to a certain extent, to work on the color schemes, to play around with it, to actually have fun, which it all boils down to. What we do is to allow people to have fun with the product.
That's fascinating. So it's not official, but this kind of comes about sometimes. I love that idea. The idea that, and it might not, is it like set option list, or is kind of sky the limit, or is it kind of still being worked on? Because I can imagine that could get out of hand, obviously. But then there's also this idea, and I think about cars, right? I think about brands like Ferrari that are notorious for like, you keep a Ferrari in these color schemes, in this condition, and this stuff, or you're blacklisted. So I don't know if you would go that far, or if you go to the other extreme where everything could be like leopard print and all this. And is it just the ability for some people to choose between a set of options, or is more options always better?
It started out with a certain number of options, and I might get into trouble for this, but I think it's too interesting to discuss with you to not talk about it.
Yeah.
The whole idea of Atelier actually was to test the water a bit and to see how far we can go. So there are certain technical limits where a certain color scheme just doesn't work because that certain color doesn't stick well, doesn't look well. But other than that, we are very open to work with our customers who come in and who actually want to have that color scheme. So I'm more of a sky is the limit guy, and the rest of the team will love that because it just means that it introduces a certain kind of headache at points. But in the end, we've always found our partners we've collaborated with to be very reasonable. So it wasn't about absurdity for its own sake. They had a very clear vision, and we've come together to execute that vision with them. And we've never had the leopard print, although we'll see if that comes about now.
Now that I mentioned it, I mean, a leopard print amp would look pretty cool.
If it's feasible. I got to say, the German in me kicks in now, and I got to say, if it's feasible.
Oh, there you go.
Pessimistic by nature.
That's awesome. So I've taken a lot of your time already, and I really appreciate it. We've already asked you the standard question a few times, but let's trip this up a little bit. So is there any song or artist that you're currently listening to that you're like, these guys or girls or whoever is going to be amazing in the future, or amazing now, and you just kind of want to share it? I'm secretly just stealing stuff from my own playlist so that I can listen to new stuff. So no pressure.
I am under a lot of pressure now because my wife actually told me on our third date or something when music was playing in the background that I seem to be living in the 80s musically. And so I'm really, it's a problem for me to get up with anything that came to market after like 2015.
You know what? You can go back to the 80s because that is me as well, 100%. And like, I'm introducing my son. My son is now, my oldest son is 10 years old. And I have like, I listen to a lot of punk rock and stuff like that. But I've been introducing him to a lot of the greats from the 80s. And we got like, he is addicted to Queen. He knows who Freddie Mercury is. And it is epic that he gets into the car and he's like, can you put on like Bicycle Race? Can you put on like this album? And I'm like, dude, like you have no idea how happy I am that you were asking for this and not some of the newer stuff. All respect to the newer stuff, but just the 80s is a golden era for sure.
Yeah, for some reason it sticks with me as well. I think one of my all-time favorites, and it's probably something everybody has heard before, but I really love Lady in Black by Uriah Heep.
Oh, that's good.
For some reason, that song gets me, especially if you're in a certain setting. It's a summer or spring evening, and despite the lyrics being rather sad, it has a certain atmosphere to it that catches me each time.
So it's funny, like I really like that song. That's a great song. That reminded me, so a couple weeks ago I started listening to some more Joan Jett, and the one that got me was Crimson and Clover. And it's not the same, but it has that kind of like that vibe where you listen to it and I'm like, oh, that's just beautiful. I love it.
Totally. And it's so strange that some songs can just have an atmosphere and create it, whilst others fall completely flat. They're great musically, but for some reason there is just nothing to it that catches you.
It doesn't hold you. It doesn't give you that emotion.
Yeah, totally.
Love it. Conradin, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And until the next time, all the best.
Thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun as always. Thanks, Jorden.